Hey, everyone. So, two quick things. First, my Facebook group page for the Suzanne Venker Show is back up. I'd been using that page for something else, but I have since moved it back to a private page just for listeners of the Suzanne Venker Show. I want a place where you all can talk with each other and where I can chime in periodically with questions and comments myself. So be aware that if you're itching to talk about the things you're hearing on this program, there is now a place to do that. Just go to facebook.com/groups/Suzanne's group. And if for some reason that doesn't work, just try going to Facebook and typing in the Suzanne Venker Show, and hopefully it will come right up. And then click on join. Okay, secondly, when was the last time you took a hot second to write a review of this podcast? I get super sad when I check it periodically and no one's written anything in like a week. I just wanted to tell you how much those reviews mean to me and to the algorithms too. Pretty sure the more reviews there are, the more the show will appear in other people's feeds and whatnot. So if you think you'll forget, like I know I probably would, keep in mind you can pause this program right now and do it, and you won't miss a thing when you come back. We'll still be here in the same spot. That's my favorite thing about podcasts. They're like DVR, which is so awesome. Okay, on with the show. From the magnificent Midwest, it's the Suzanne Venker Show, where men and women are equal in value but wildly different by nature. Join us here every week as we challenge the culture's hugely flawed narratives about men, women, sex, and love. From coast to coast and from around the world, thank you for joining us. Hey, everyone. So glad to be back. I'm really excited to talk with Liz Durham again today. So just a quick reminder, she is a gal I've had on a couple of times, and her podcast is called Being Different, which I highly recommend. And so I listen to that pretty regularly, and she was talking with a gal last week or week before, and I was fascinated by the conversation and said, okay, I have to have Liz back on. We've got to cover this very controversial idea because I was so impressed that I'm just impressed with how honest she is. And so, I've invited her back. So Liz, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Suzanne. I love talking to you.
Yay. Okay. So just to give people a little bit of background, you had on, back up a little bit. Again, Liz worked in banking for a lot of years, made a lot of money, and recently came home, quit, stays home, has 2 children and one about to be born. Congratulations, yeah. Liz. So exciting. So crazy. Yeah. So she's in the throes of a completely different life. She's a millennial. And she talks openly and honestly about this massive transition on her podcast. And that's how she and I think got together originally. So last week you were talking to a gal who was your replacement at the bank.
Yes.
And you were talking about marriage and motherhood and the transition from work to home and all of that. Not that she's done that yet, but she said that you have been seeing you do it has given her some sort of hope that she might do it. And so you went down in the weeds about her background and her mom and your background and your mom and just decisions you've made. And in the course of that conversation, you told her that you actually told your boss not to hire a woman.
Yes, I did.
And I said, wow, I have so much to say about that. I wanted to talk about that. So that's why I've invited you on to have a serious conversation about this very important and taboo topic of, hiring women over men and men over women and that whole thing that is very taboo because we're not supposed to discriminate against especially pregnant women, but just women in general, which theoretically, of course not. But the reality is there are women, many women like you who go gangbusters and then either cut back or leave. And nobody wants to talk about how that affects businesses. So that's what we're going to do today. So tell everybody, go ahead and I'll give you the floor to tell everybody how all that went down.
Yeah, so the industry that I was in, I did mortgages, and the learning curve on that is very long. So my boss trained me for several years. It wasn't just a few months. And he taught me everything I know about the business and, helped me build a very successful career. And then when I got pregnant and had kids, I tried to continue the career for a couple of years and it was just a disaster. And so eventually I decided to, step back for a while because I wanted to be with my kids. And what was really hard for me was I didn't want to give up my career. Like I loved my job and I loved the people that I worked with, but there was no way for me to control the hours that I was working and how much I was working. And so eventually I was like, I just can't do this anymore. Like something's got to give. And my boss, when he and I had talked, he was originally really, he wanted me to keep working. He was like very much supportive of me, like trying new nannies. He didn't want me to send my kids to daycare or anything like that. But he did want me, he was like, shell out some serious cash, hire a good nanny, like make your life easier at home. And I went through lots of different nannies and stuff. And he would always just tell me I was being too cheap with the nannies. But finally, at the end of the day, what it came to was I didn't want a nanny raising my kids. I wanted me to be raising my kids. And so eventually he gave me his blessing and he was super sad because I was like his succession plan at work. He was really sad that I was leaving, but he was like, I understand that you want to be home and I want you to be home and I'm proud of you and all that. And so he was very, very supportive of the decision I made. But when he hired my replacement, she's a young girl, she's 24, about to be 25. I told him he was making a mistake. And he was like, why? She's young. She doesn't have any intention of having kids anytime soon, blah, blah, blah. She's got like all the qualities that I need for this very specific skill set in this job. I can't find anybody else like it. Like, she's going to be great. She's going to be just like you. And I said, well, if she wants to have kids, she's going to be just like me. You're going to be in the same boat, 5 years from now or 10, whenever it is, like you're going to have the same issues. And so he and I argued for a long time because he thought that I, hadn't tried to spend enough money on to get a nanny that I would have been satisfied with, blah, 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 all that. And so we agreed to disagree. And it's actually funny because after the podcast came out with Taylor last week, he actually listened to it. I didn't know if he would or not. And of course, I get a sit down meeting with him. And he was like, I can't believe you said that. I wasn't even there to defend myself.
Well, you
And
didn't
give
say
my
anything awful. You just relayed
no,
the conversation, I
I
think.
just said what the facts were. And so he and I sat there and I said, do you agree with me or disagree with me now? Because Taylor has told us she wants to have kids at some point. So we know now, like we know what her intentions are. And it was funny because Taylor was part of this conversation with all three of us. We're all sitting there together.
Oh,
And he
interesting.
said, yeah, um, he was like, I think that it depends on the woman, which I completely agree with him because all women are different. Um, he said some women are okay with working and like, having a nanny with their kids. Like Taylor's mom had a housekeeper that took care of her, and that was a good setup for them and they liked it. Um, but he goes, I eventually realized with you, Liz, that it didn't matter who the nanny was
Hmm.
or how much you paid them or how good they were. You just want to be the one raising your kids.
Hmm.
And I said, and Taylor's not going to know that until she's at home with her kids. She doesn't know that now,
Nope.
what she wants to be. I would have thought that based on my personality that I never would have quit working. So you just don't know those things until you get into it. And I said to him, the conclusion that I have come to is I think that women can have careers. I'm not saying you cannot have a career and have kids. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there are certain careers, which I was in a male dominated industry. I was getting paid a lot, but I was working around the clock. I had no control over my schedule. Those careers are not conducive to being a good mother. And so if I had the knowledge that I have now, hindsight's 2020, I would have gone back and said, I know at some point in my life I want to have kids. I want to choose a career that will allow me flexibility to step back when I have kids and still do it a little bit, but not have to do it like 70 hours a week, you know?
So I
So
wrote,
that's where he and I agreed on that point, is that the job that Taylor and I had is better for a man if you've
mm-hmm,
got kids.
mm-hmm. And so you can see how totally taboo this is, because this means acknowledging that there are differences between women and men and motherhood and fatherhood and all that. And at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the very first book I wrote 20 years ago, I talked about this very thing, that there are some, when I got to the end of the book and I explained all about, basically it was about the needs of children and how they conflict with demanding careers. And at the
Mm-hmm.
end, I said something to the effect of, so does this mean that there are some careers that just won't be an option for you? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You can do them, but you're not going to be happy and you're not going to do either thing well. So if you want to not have that life and you want to feel successful, mostly at home, but in both domains to some degree, then you need to pick something that works with motherhood, exactly what we're talking about. But even just saying that, the initial response is, so what do you mean? Women can't be president? Women can't be brain surgeons? They can't fly to the moon? Like all these big, like completely, ridiculous, extreme examples, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
of careers. The idea is that you wouldn't encourage a woman, a young girl, to do this. And I'm like, well, first of all, yeah, because life is about trade-offs, and it's not that you can't do something or you're not capable. It's that it's not going to work logistically with this other
Right.
thing. So at the end of the day, you have to decide what you want. That's such a big, important question that's not asked. It's a big question, right? What do you want?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want? And when you figure that out, you can start to back up and map out a life based on that one goal. But you really have to know what you want. And so, like you said, a lot of women don't know until they get into it. So what I've always said is just assume. I think it's fair to assume that your life is never going to look the same after you have children as it did before, and that your priorities are going to change. And most women do step out. That's like statistically a fact. It's not.
Right.
So it's always better to err on the side of what we see happening. But these poor, and anybody in business, you can't say, well, are you pregnant or are you planning on sticking around? Even though it's a completely legit question to
You
ask
know
at a
what's
prospective
funny?
employee.
My dad, when I got my first job, I was going to the interview and he said, take your engagement ring off.
There you go.
And I was like,
Yeah.
why? He
Yeah.
goes, because men don't want to see a young girl that's getting engaged. They know that they're going to end up with kids and they'll want to pay you less or whatever. And I remember thinking about that, like, well, they can't discriminate. And now I'm thinking, but I took the engagement ring off in the interview.
Interesting. And so how
Yeah.
do you feel about that now? Because the other side of that conversation is that really fair to the employer?
So here's what my input is on this, and it's not politically correct at all, but I feel like I can say it. I did a job and made a ton of money at a job that it was totally male dominated, and I had so much male support. My boss was a male, the bank president was a male, males trained me. Like no male ever tried to hold me down from doing the job. They all made sure that I became very successful at my job. And I proved I can do the male job and make more than most of the males I know in my life. Um, However, if I would have told, like, I don't know that I ever told my boss, like, I want to have kids, I don't want to have kids. I just didn't like think about that kind of stuff. We didn't talk
Yeah.
about it. But for him, he hired me to be his retirement plan, his succession plan. So he was literally going to hand over his entire business to me, and then he was going to make residual off of me continuing to run his business.
So he was
And
really thinking long term in a way that
oh,
you might not have even been.
Oh, of course. And he was going to invest years in training me, like years of his life. And that's a big commitment, like tons of hours and hours and hours of spending on one individual to give them, like, to pass on this knowledge so that they can be successful in this industry. And I feel like I did a complete disservice to him by, I mean, had I known, I guess I could have said to him, like, at some point, I want to have kids and this might not look the same. I don't think he and I ever had that conversation, but I literally like left him high and dry. When I got pregnant with Mac, I was just like, thanks, I'm out of here. See ya. Like, I appreciate everything you've done. But that put him in a place where it set back his entire
Of
retirement.
course. Of
Because now
course.
he has to go in and retrain somebody.
It happens all the time. And it's a political shit show, really, but nobody's allowed to talk about the other side of it because it's all about discrimination, and you should be able to come and go whether you're leaving or not, and too bad for the businesses. But imagine if you and I had a business, a really small business, and we were going to hire a couple people. I would not hire a pregnant woman.
Oh, I wouldn't either. And it's a sign of, like, for me, I wasn't knowingly being disrespectful to him or his time, because I didn't know that I was going to get pregnant. Like, that wasn't my plan. But if you think about it, it's really dumb, because most girls are going to get pregnant and be moms. Like, so in my mind, I'm like, he wasn't thinking it through and I wasn't thinking it through. Didn't think it through. And that's why when he went to hire as my replacement, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's nothing against her. I know that she can do the job, and I know that she's capable, and she can do everything that I did. It wasn't like a jealousy thing or anything like that. In my mind, I was just trying to protect him. Like, do you want to have the same thing happen 5 years from now that you just went through with me? And so that's where I think that, like, it's unfair to companies. That company invested so much money and so much time in me. And while I was there, I did produce, and they made a lot of money off of me. But had it been a male, think about how much more they could have made with that investment in me. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if you listened to the part in the podcast with Taylor about how we were talking about the new Barbie movie. I haven't seen it. She was telling me that Barbie's like an astronaut, and there's Barbie construction workers and like all these things. And I'm like, okay, like, yes, women 100% can do it. I did it. I did the things. It doesn't mean that we're incapable. It just means, like, why don't we talk about the motherhood side of things? If we plan so much for these careers that are so big and important, but then totally leave out of the conversation, like, do you want to reproduce? Which we all do because it's innate in us and biological. Well, why in the world would we not plan for the reproduction part as much as we would for the careers? And I'll tell you why. It's because these fucking feminists have brainwashed everybody, and they totally belittle motherhood and act like it doesn't matter and that you're lesser than if you do that. And I'm telling you, Suzanne, I loved my job. I miss it sometimes. I get so much more fulfillment from being mom than I ever did my job. Sorry for using the F word, but I really get fired up.
Oh, that's okay. That won't get cut out. I like to have it used sparingly. That way it lands a little better. It's fun to watch you and to listen to you, because you're about 20 years younger than I am, and you feel as emphatically about this as I did when I was your age. Not that I don't feel that way anymore, but I was in the throes of that particular argument that you just made. Like, why the hell are we not ignoring this side and screwing up people's lives? There's a completely different way to map out your life so that you don't get stuck. That's basically what I wrote about for years. And I've kind of moved into a different space now, but it's just fun to watch you and listen to you. And I get it, girl. That's what I'm trying to say.
It makes me mad because I feel like we're doing a disservice to all these young girls.
We are. You feel like it because we are.
Yeah.
I mean, and such an easy way of describing is that there's a massive difference between who you are at 20 and who you are at 30 as a woman.
Yes.
And there's no reason why we can't educate women about what is going to happen to them, to most of them, 99% of them, when they're right around the age of 30.
Right.
And their priorities shift, and they start to want a baby, and which is really not the time to think about it. But anyway, so that's kind of where we are. And then they have babies, and all of a sudden their life looks very different. That is there's nothing that should be really political about that statement, that you're going to be different at 30 and 20. And I feel like that's just a really obvious place to start.
Right. Also, I think that what's really unfair is, we don't talk to women about the career choices that we force them to make when they're 18 and they have no clue what they're doing at 18 anyways. But, like, for me, thankfully, I made a lot of money and I put myself in a place to where I could step back. But a lot of moms cannot. They do not
Right.
have the financial option that I had. And thankfully my husband was supportive of it. But I'm like, had they at least had the information so that
Mhm.
they could make an informed decision, they could
Bingo.
still choose the exact same choices.
Bingo. Exactly. That's been my
Not
argument all
have
along.
that information up front to say, I felt like I didn't have the information, which is weird.
And so let's talk about that for a minute. So how do you get that information? It's, it essentially it starts with exactly what you and she were getting at last on that last conversation, which is your first inclination or messaging, I should say, about this obviously comes from your parents, particularly
Mhm.
moms.
Yep.
And you're going to sort of absorb what their story was, good or bad, right or wrong, whatever their story is, you're going to absorb it, and then presumably make similar choices or different choices based on whatever that takeaway was. So talk a little bit about what yours was relative to the lady you were talking to, because that I think was interesting, because she said she'd never, I think you both were agreeing that you hadn't planned and you were not in a position to think about it in advance yourselves, and didn't come till
Mhm.
later, right?
Yeah, I mean, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and homeschooled us all. And like, you would think that in my mind, I would think like, oh yeah, I want to have kids and would have thought about these things and all of that. But I think that, and this is not like knocking my parents or anything like that. My dad, at a young age, they were like, oh, Liz is pretty smart. She gets good grades. Like she can figure things out. She works hard. Like these qualities that they taught me. Um, my dad was very much like, you go to school and get a good career. Like that was just very much the messaging that was being pushed at that point. And you don't want to be the parent that tells your kid like you're incapable of something or like you're holding them back in any way. But we never really talked about it. So like I went to school and then I went to grad school, and I, because like my mom and I had a very combative relationship in high school, we were both just really hard headed, type A, like a lot of girls fight with their moms in high school. I was like, I'm doing the exact opposite of what she did in her
Mm.
life. And so I was like, I'm going to go conquer the world. And
But see,
I
that
think,
played a role. That played a role. That's what I mean. No matter what your messaging was, you
yeah,
had a takeaway that sort of caused you to go in a certain direction.
yeah. And so then, I was in grad school and I always knew like I'm just going to get a job and I'm going to work hard. And I thought in my head, like, I will have a family at some point and I will have kids, but it never really went past that. Like, I didn't develop that thought any
Mm-hmm.
further. But to my defense, nobody was pushing me to
Yeah.
develop that thought further. Like, everybody's pushing you to build a
Mm-hmm.
resume.
Mm-hmm.
What internships are you going to have? What classes are you going to take? What are you going to major in? Like, who are you, going to do all this stuff for? And so I think that, when you're 18 years old or 20 or whatever, those young years, you need guidance. You still need your parents and you need teachers and you need mentors to like make you think past what do the next 60
Exactly.
days look like, you know?
Exactly.
And so but Taylor, her mom worked. She was a physical therapist, I believe. And Taylor's mom had a housekeeper who like raised them so they didn't have to go to daycare. They went to like preschool and then school on. So her mom had a person like that. And so I think Taylor said like, well, I just always knew I was going to work. And so that's why I had the conversation with her, is because I wanted to know, like, are you even thinking about these things when you date
Mm-hmm.
guys? Do you even have these conversations? Like, where are girls at now? Are they in the same mindset that I was in at 20, or have they changed at all? Has anything like shifted yet? And I feel like if anything, it's shifted even worse in the wrong
Yeah, because
direction.
now they don't want to have children at all. That's
Yeah.
another thing. That's a um okay, and then you guys got into about why it's not okay, or why people don't think to, when they're on a date or when they're first dating a guy, to lay it all out on the table about what you want regarding this issue of staying home or working. And so many people get into this boat where they just don't have this conversation, or they assume because they're both working then that it's just going to continue on
Right.
and everything's not just going to completely change. So that's, I can't remember exactly what you said about it, but except the fact that there needs to be more encouragement, I guess that's the word, for young people to be open about that, which of course requires knowing, going back to what do you want? You have to know what you want to have that conversation. Like I would not have married. I mean, I did discuss it on the second date with my husband. I mean, it was just right out there. Date number 2. This is my plan. So of course I'm looking at his work situation. Of course I am. And that's absolutely normal. It's just kind of dumb not to, actually. But again, if you're not taught to, you're not really dumb, because nobody says that anymore now. Make sure you pick a guy who can support you. That's like taboo to say.
Was that on your radar with your first marriage, though?
So that was a little different because we were both in college.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
he wasn't, I mean, it was just super clear. He was 2 years older too. He left, graduated early, and was working for several years in the world. So he was sort of quote unquote ahead of me in that regard. And it was just, he was on his way, and it was kind of obvious. So it really didn't require so much of a conversation. But yeah, we did have a conversation with my parents about, we did, about the fact that I was going to be at home, and because we were discussing geography and where we were going to live. And he was talking about, well, if she's not going to work, she kind of has to follow what my job's going to be. And that was part of the problem, because I wanted to be near my family, which is not where he wanted to be. So that's what caused that issue. But at any rate, yes, we did discuss it. I discussed it in both situations. But I do think that's because, again, going back to the messaging as a kid, my mom, remember, was the mom who was a stockbroker in the male-dominated field. Yeah, for 15 years before she came home. So,
conversation with you ahead of time?
Yes, I was raised hearing, because she quit when, like you did, and never went back. So I grew up hearing there's just no way to do both of these things. You have to, your kids need you when you're little. Here's why. You can't do both. Choose something that you can. I mean, I was hearing very countercultural messaging because I happened to have a mom who did something so countercultural herself. She was the oddball back in those days because everyone was home and she wasn't. So I had sort of a leg up in that regard, because I was hearing something most people didn't know to say because they didn't have that experience of trying to do it.
Right.
Which might be more your mom's story. Like, you don't think you can't because you don't have anybody having tried and told you that it's not going to work, which is very helpful. Like, your mom might not have even known.
My mom, actually, she worked with me, and then she quit when my sister was born. And she was a big rah-rah feminist, which is funny. And then when she had us, she flipped to the opposite extreme about, like, I'm going to homeschool my kids, and never went back to work until, we were all grown and stuff. And so, but it's just funny to me that, like, we didn't never really, like, discuss how what it actually looks like day to day when you're trying to work and have kids. That was just never a topic of discussion, really. Not that I'm, like, mocking her for it or anything. I just feel like it's something that's, like, not commonly talked about with mothers and daughters.
And just think about how different, how far reaching it would be to incorporate this conversation into college, high school or college years, in terms of, I mean, think about how far reaching that is. It has to do with what choices you make that will fit your life. It has to do with the kind of person you'll marry. It could save marriages. I mean, it's such an obviously practical way to avoid the mess. But because it's so political, nobody touches it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah. And it's also, to me, like you said about employers, it's unfair to them to not have the conversation because it's just realistic.
It's realistic.
It's not discrimination. It's just life, like, part of life is that you are a woman and that you can have kids and that you're probably going to want to. And that's not a bad part of life. It's just a realistic part of life. So, like, let's plan something that's fair for all of us, that works for all parties involved. And we can't do that.
And you probably grew up hearing that women were held back from these quote unquote more male dominated jobs, when in reality, women gravitated toward nursing and teaching for the same reasons they do today. And that is that it fits with your life plans of being a mother and not doing the whole grind. That's a choice that women are continuing to make in spite of that messaging over the years, because it works. It works. It's practical. Who gives a shit whether it's politically correct? It works.
Exactly. I have two friends that I would say have done an excellent job of balancing. Like they both took time off when they had two kids, and now they're both nurse practitioners, and they can go back to work 1 day a week or 2 days a week for, half a day if they want to, and keep the insurance and still get out of the house a little bit. And it's like perfect for them. And I'm like, gosh, how nice would it be to have that as an option? But because I boxed myself into the career that I did, like I can't just
Mm-hmm.
go become a nurse practitioner right now. It's not, that's not how it works. So it's like, man, why wouldn't somebody like even a college counselor have been
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, these are some good fits for if you want to consider having kids one day.
Because imagine what this conversation would look like if you were my daughter and you said, or even like you have a daughter, Charlie, if she said, I want to be a lawyer, mommy. Now, well,
Hmm.
actually, don't say mommy because she's too little then. What if she seriously says it, like as a teen, and
Hmm.
she wants to go into law? Okay, so there's a couple of ways of, that's the PC way of handling that is, oh, sounds great, dear. You can do anything you want to do. Have at it. Like that's
Yeah.
the end of the conversation.
Right.
Or you say, well, there's law and then there's law. There's some law careers that are more family friendly than others, but basically law school's hell. And then when you get out of law school, you're going to go work 80 hours a week because that's what they do to you.
Hmm.
And you literally do nothing else, like literally for years. Is that what, and I'm going back to that same question, what do you want? Because what something sounds like and what something is like are often not the same. And so
Yeah.
you need that presented to you so that you don't get yourself into that situation of saying, what the hell am I doing now? And then you feel like you waste your degree because you really don't want to work in that way. It needs a conversation that's deeper than just, you go girl, do whatever you want.
Totally. And I think that like it's, you can tell your daughter, you can do it. Yes, of course you can do it if you want to, but here's what the consequences are going to be if you choose to do it. And also, one thing that I feel like parents also in our country in general is doing a huge disservice to our kids on, especially girls, is we're pushing them to go get these typical manly careers. They get into a crap ton of student debt and then
Oh,
they go
that's
have
all.
kids. And then it's like, well, you're never going to dig yourself out of this financial mess. But like, why didn't the parents and the people say, is this really what you want to do? Because if you want to be a doctor, of course you can be a doctor. We're not saying you're not capable of being a doctor, but you're going to take out $300,000 in student loans. You're going to be in residency. And then by the time you're finally ready to start your practice when you're 33 years old, your clock is going to be ticking. You're going to want to have kids. And then you're not going to have time to start your office like you want to because it's a crap ton of work. So then you're going to go take a job where you're making $120,000 a year and you're never going to dig yourself out of this financial hole. So is that really what you want to do, big feminist? Go conquer the men in the world? Like that just sounds terrible to me.
You said it for me. That was perfectly said.
you know
Bingo, bingo. And there have to be enough people willing to say that. And I think by starting to hear people, even if it's just through this, just a podcast, just hearing it, just hearing those voices saying that thing that you just said is so helpful for parents, because they really don't know what to say.
Yeah.
They think well, many of them, not all. There's plenty of smart parents who can figure this out on their own, but there's a lot of people who just don't know whether to say, yes, go ahead, whatever, just what you said with the student loans and everything, or don't worry about any of that, just get married and have a kid, which
Yeah.
I've never really heard. I know one person, I know one person in my life who described to me that that's how she was raised. And it was shocking to me because, I mean, at 55, I've never heard that personally or known anybody. I didn't have any contemporaries who were raised with that messaging. So that was really shocking when she told me that. She's a little younger than I am, but that's how rare that is anymore, is my point.
Is that was she from the South?
Yeah, she was Virginia.
Interesting. I feel like
Yeah,
there is still some of that
but
messaging in like the deep rural South, but
South,
it's
yeah.
not
But
very
it's
common.
so rare. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so rare.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is I don't think people know that there's this massive middle ground between that and you go girl.
Right.
And there
Exactly. And
is. Yeah.
my thing is, I was talking to my producer the other day. she helps with like my website and stuff. And I said, you know what? She doesn't have kids yet. She's not married yet. But I was like, I think you have the perfect career to be a mom. And the reason why I think that is because you can control your clientele. You can decide, like, I don't want to take on 20 clients this year. I only want to take on 3. Like you have control of what you're doing, and you're still getting to be creative when you want to in the times that you want to. But if
It's
you
the
want to
best.
spend more time with your kids, then it's awesome. And, I need to ask her further. Like, did your parents make you think about that? Or like, did you ever actually think that through, like with any intention, or did it just happen that way? But I feel like also, we talk about this is with daughters specifically, but I think that it needs to be discussed with like our sons as well, or they need to at least be listening to the conversation.
Definitely.
Because
Definitely.
like, do you want that girl who was so ambitious and so cool, and she started out and everything was great, and then she snaps on you like I did when you have kids? Because most guys, like, I think that they think like, I want to get married and have a wife with kids. And guys generally want peace. And so, like you and I talked about in coaching and everything, like it all starts fine until it's not fine anymore. And the guy just wants peace. But like, did he do any planning to think about what the whole picture would look like either?
No,
Probably.
not at all. In fact, if anything, that's something that young women are dealing with, is having to they course correct. And I'm going to do a podcast on that, because I've gotten inundated with questions about this. Like, I already have, my kid in daycare. I did everything wrong, or I planned it all wrong, but now I want a more traditional life, and my husband doesn't want me to be home, or he doesn't think we can afford it. We've created this messy situation in the name
Mhm.
of politics. Thank you very much. And now men who never thought that way before, right? That it was considered a prideful thing to not have to have a wife that works, because it means you're doing well, right, for your family. And now it's the complete opposite. Like, you get to work, girl, because we need 2 incomes.
Mhm.
We did that to them. It's not like
Right.
that's a sociological phenomenon that we created.
This is not their fault at all. We've stuck the middle finger to them so long and said, I don't need you. I don't need you, until shocker, we have kids and we need you. And then we have to come crawling back, but it's not crawling back because we've conditioned to be men. So we're literally cussing them out every night, which is not what they want. And it's like, all of this, I feel like not all of it can be avoided, but a
Out of it
large
can.
majority could be avoided if we just would have had like more planning conversations when we were younger. And I hate to say this, but you can't put anything on the government or schools anymore. It's the parents'
Mm-hmm.
responsibility to talk to their kids about these things,
Oh,
I think.
amen. Oh, definitely. Amen. The answer, I feel like the answers for everything is in parenting. But of
Yeah.
course, then you get into, well, what do you do with the kids whose parents just aren't going to do that? Um, but yeah, it's just, anyway, not to get too far down this path. I really wanted to hone in on this. I think we were talking about a little more of something else, but I wanted to really hone in on this idea about businesses legitimately being in a pickle about hiring women
Yeah.
in the prime of life, when they know that they politically can't, quote unquote, discriminate, but they need them to stick around.
Hmm.
Nobody ever talks about this. So when you
Yeah.
said that, I'm like, I want to address this and say, this is a thing. This
Yeah.
is a real thing for businesses.
It's totally a thing. And it's, they talk about, I guess, millennials and whatever generation comes after us is we like have no loyalty. We hop around from place to place to place, but it's really, it's unfair to them because they are spending so much time and resources to like train somebody to do a job that if you just hop up and leave because of kids or whatever, like you wonder why our country's in a big mess and all the small businesses are going
Mm-hmm.
away and everything's consolidating. Well, we're not really doing anything to help that situation. And we're not being honest. Nobody's being honest
Nobody's
because we
being honest.
don't say anything that's not politically correct, but it's just reality.
It's just reality. I think we should be able to ask, are you planning on leaving?
Absolutely.
Are you planning
Yeah.
on leaving? Because I don't want to hire a pregnant woman who's going to be home with her. I totally support that 100%, but that's not going to work for this.
Right. And I also think that, like, not to get into the politics side too much, but all these women, they just harp on all the time how we need legislation for like better maternity leave and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, really, it's not the employer's responsibility to clean up your mess.
No, it's not. And it's not
And
really an answer anyway, because
well,
it's
it's not.
it's only a Band-Aid for a couple of months. That's really not even going to do what kids need anyway, just for a couple of months.
Well, and there's these other countries that they're like, oh, they get a year of maternity leave. And I'm like, yeah, do you want the company to be
Uh-huh.
bankrupt? They're just
Mm-hmm.
doing that for everybody. Like, it doesn't, economically, it doesn't work. And so you have to do the planning and you have to take responsibility for yourself. But I think that 100% companies should be able to ask, do you plan to have kids? Like, what are your plans? And even you could have the conversation at that point, like, are you going to need a job that's full time now, but
Mm-hmm.
needs to be full
Yeah.
time later? Like, let's actually talk about this so that it works financially for us and you, and so that everybody's not hating their life.
And on that point, good place to end. Good place to end it, Liz. Thanks. I really appreciate your coming on again to talk about it. I know I'm not going to talk to you for a while because you're about to have a baby.
I know.
Yay. Did we know? I think I asked you. Wait, is it a girl?
It's a boy.
It's a boy. It's a boy.
Yeah.
It's another boy.
Yeah.
Another
It'll
boy.
be good. But honestly, I'm so thankful to be at home, like to be able to get to know him and actually not have to stress out about maternity leave and all these things.
It's going to be great.
Think about how weird this is going to be, Suzanne. When you first started talking to me or met me, I don't know if I had 2 kids then, but I was still working full time. How stressed I was of all these things. This is going to be my first time having a baby and not being working. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that is weird. I did think about that. I think you got with me when you were working, but you didn't start coaching until you had quit. Pretty sure. Am I wrong?
Maybe.
I don't remember you like working. Maybe you were, I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world for you. Very exciting. Yeah. Well, keep in touch. We'll talk. And yeah, thanks again for coming on and having this very politically incorrect conversation with me.
They're good to have. They need to be had.
There aren't many people who will, so it's usually just me now.
I'll come in and join you and drop an F-bomb here and there because I get so mad about it.
I get it. Okay, awesome. All right. Thanks, Liz. Talk to you soon. And that ends this hour of the Suzanne Venker Show. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave us a review, as well as share this episode with a friend. As always, you may reach me with any questions or comments at Suzanne@thesuzannevenkershow.com. And if you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can do so at patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.